On behalf of the National Wrestling Coaches Association, keep Fresno State wrestling and the sport of wrestling as a whole. My name is Jason Bryant from Mat Talk Online. Today, a very special kickoff roundtable as we kick off our Keep Fresno State Wrestling campaign. Before we get started with our impressive panel, we're going to tell you why Fresno State Wrestling is important, not just to the state of California, not just to the Valley, and not just to the sport of wrestling. I'm going to give you a couple stats about Fresno State. We brought back the program in 2015 after it was cut. And in the program's first 3 years, we've seen Fresno State move to the Big 12 as an affiliate member in wrestling. We've seen them return to be a top 10 team in attendance nationwide amongst Division I wrestling programs. And we've seen them return to the podium as Josh Hokett played 2 sports and earned All-American honors on the mat and in name with the second-team All-American honors this past season, as we didn't have the championships. But a thing we've seen throughout this pandemic, 100 schools have dropped sports, and that number is 393 total sports. In Division I, there's 30 schools that have dropped 95 teams in 23 different sports. Among those are 3 Division I wrestling programs, 2 in the state of California, one of which the program we're talking about today, Fresno State. 37 individual All-American honors at both the NCAA Division I and collegiate divisions prior to our 3-divisional format. Of those 37 medals, 23 individuals won them, 18 are from the state of California, which means all told, 37 of those medals in Fresno State wrestling history have come from the state of California. Enough about the stats. Our first story, our first speaker is Yaru Washington. He is a 2-time All-American at Fresno State. He started his career right down the street at Fresno City College, where he won a California Community College championship at 134 pounds. He's currently the executive director at Beat the Streets Los Angeles, giving back to the sport. And Yaru, when we talk about what wrestling does for people, what you're doing with Beat the Streets in Los Angeles, you're giving the opportunity for some first chances, some places second and third chances, but opportunities to and access for a college degree. You had not the easiest go of it growing up. And how much did wrestling and Fresno State wrestling specifically change your life?
Well, first, I just want to thank everybody for showing up today. This is real important for Fresno State, but for wrestling in general. Without, wrestling, without Fresno State, I'm not where I am today. A little bit about my background. I grew up in East Oakland, California. My father was shot and killed when I was just 9 months old. My mother, who's an amazing woman, was an addict, an alcoholic, died homeless. I dropped out of high school when I was about 14 years old, wandering the streets. Luckily I had a brother who took me in. I ended up in a small town called Corcoran, eventually ended up in Porterville, in the Central Valley. And that's how I found the sport of wrestling. Starting in high school, I had a great coach and a mentor there at that high school who really just taught me hard work, responsibility. And, somehow, some way, I won a state title my senior year. From there, I had an amazing coach, Coach Bill Music, a junior college coach, who he sat with me for a full day to get me situated at the welfare office, to get my financial aid in order. He did so much for me, giving me an opportunity. I ended up living with another Fresno State All-American, Alfonso Tucker. And we had some lofty goals that we pursued and achieved. And ultimately, I ended up at Fresno State with Coach Deleto, who's here on this call. I was again fortunate to be a couple-time All-American, and he's the one that convinced me to keep wrestling after college. I was able to make a U.S. national team. I wasn't a DC and Jordan Burroughs were on this call, or John Smith, but I did have a chance to travel the world. Meet all kinds of amazing people in the wrestling community. It led me to a coaching career at Columbia University and Iowa State University, there with Kevin Jackson, who was an idol of mine. And, and now today, where I'm at now, in Los Angeles, working with Beat the Streets LA, helping kids like me, giving back. And so, there's a lot of stories like mine that are out there. Wrestling is so important. Fresno State wrestling is so important. Wrestling in the Valley is so important. And, again, I appreciate everyone for showing up today to tell that story.
Now, Yaru, one thing that's unique about your story is the sport of wrestling. We say anybody can wrestle. Now, if you do some math and look at your weight class, there's not too many 134-pound, starting tight ends in the NFL or maybe outside of Muggsy Bogues as far as the height goes in the NBA. Wrestling was an opportunity for you to compete and have a vehicle to earn a college degree. When we look at that value, what that value meant for people of your stature, how much does wrestling become a lifesaver, not just from the tough upbringing, but that opportunity to stave off a bully and be able to compete at the next level and earn that degree.
Yeah, I'd like to believe that I could have been a football player, but I actually did play 1 year and I was okay. But yeah, wrestling was it for me. There was something about it. I was, a little bit angry when I was younger. It gave me a good outlet. And it's opened up the world for me. That's undeniable. Without wrestling, again, I don't see myself being in the place that I'm at. And there were just a lot of amazing people in the wrestling community that helped me to get here. And so but yeah, so earn a degree, travel the world, do what I'm doing now. It's blessed me for sure.
Going to touch on this a little later, but just the relationship with your coach at Fresno City, who then, there's the D1 school right down the street. I mean, how much of the push from Fresno City to Fresno State was there to be coached by a guy that did the same route you did?
Yeah, it was great back then. The Abbases were there. We were able to kind of co-train back then. We were Sam and I were talking. We were training when I just came to Fresno City, and he was a senior at Fresno State. But Coach Deleto really built that program, and we were producing All-Americans, and so it was a great time. That era, and obviously it continued after that.
Going to touch on some of those alumni that stayed in the Valley and are coaching here a little bit with Coach Deleto. But you brought up your roommate, Tucker. He had a similar backstory in terms of a rough upbringing. And how much did you two kind of bounce off each other and drive each other? And again, the vehicle of the sport of wrestling is what put you two together.
Yeah, we met when we were, freshmen, living in some apartment in Fresno. And, he had a very similar background. He hadn't met his mother. His father was an addict. At that time, I remember just sitting with him. We were all about getting that education in wrestling, and we kind of made a commitment right then and there to pursue those goals. And we really leaned on each other and helped each other. His family became my family, the Darling family, and so that was instrumental for me.
When you look at the type of athletes that have that came before you at Fresno, that were there with you at Fresno State, and then they were after you, they all came there for the sport of wrestling. Some of them having the access to a degree, some of them not having access to a degree. If you were to look at the relevance to the university that wrestling has, obviously being someone who's represented the school, why is it important that Fresno State keep the wrestling program?
Well, I mean, the Fresno, Clovis area in the Valley, I mean, there aren't too many places in the country, maybe the world, that have that kind of wrestling culture that that area has. Obviously it's a successful program. We have Olympians who have come from there. Lots of lots of folks from different backgrounds. It tends to be a high Latinx population that that area serves. So you get a lot of first generation kids like myself, to earn a college degree. I think it's, there's lots of reasons why it's important.
When you look at the kids you've got now, beat the streets, Los Angeles, a lot of them coming from past that, they had similar upbringings. And how grateful was it for you to know that, oh, Fresno State's going to come back when they announced it was coming back, and you knew that you could send kids that had similar backgrounds to you to a place that you thrived educationally and athletically?
Yeah, we're building in LA, and that's the goal. We want to get these kids off to college, help them develop careers. And I'd actually, we got a couple of kids over to Fresno City College, and the next step was Fresno State. So they, I'd love to see kids from our program end up there, compete for Fresno, earn their degrees, and accomplish their wrestling goals. So yeah, that's exciting. It was exciting.
I'm going to ask you to set this next one up as we're going to move to Dennis Deleto, your coach for 24 years at Fresno State. Again, brought in some big teams, big crowds, it was a real event Fresno State Wrestling was during his tenure. So I want you to tell me one of the best things Coach Dennis Deleto taught you about the sport of wrestling when you were under his tutelage.
Coach taught me, I think he actually fixed my fireman's carry. That was one of the things he taught me. But, Coach is he's a passionate wrestling person. He loves the sport. He's helped so many people. And so I'd say, he just increased my passion throughout my time with him.
Yaru Washington, Executive Director of Beat the Streets Los Angeles, with his piece about why Fresno State Wrestling, why we should keep Fresno State Wrestling. Yaru, your story, I'm sure you could go into in deeper depths of what it is, what it was about, and how wrestling, again, saved your life and changed your life. But for now, we thank you for your time, and we appreciate the effort you as an alum are putting into keeping Fresno State Wrestling.
Thanks so much.
Now we're going to move over to Coach Dennis Deleto, the aforementioned Dean of Wrestling at Fresno State. Like Yaru, came from Fresno City, finished his career at Fresno State, ultimately became the head coach there. And Coach Deleto, when we talk about athletes like Yaru, you've had a lot of athletes with backgrounds like Yaru Washington. Not all of them were as successful on the mat as he was. And a lot of them ended up loving the sport. They end up coaching in the Valley. They end up becoming great leaders and mentors and sending their kids on to you to wrestle when you were coaching there at Fresno State. What are some of those examples of athletes that may not have lit up the headlines in the newspaper or on the internet, but were great citizens of Fresno State and great citizens of the sport of wrestling?
Well, one of the prides I had is all the athletes I had out coaching at one time. I think I had like 25 to 30 kids that were actually head coaches or assistant coaches in San Joaquin Valley or somewhere in the state of California. So I took a lot of pride in that. They left our place. A lot of them weren't starters. A lot of them weren't All-Americans. In fact, the All-Americans usually are a little bit more, they get a better job than the high school coaches sometimes. But no, I took a lot of pride in that, and took a lot of pride in a guy like Yaru. He's a self-made man. Look at what he's done. I mean, it's just unbelievable how these guys can. I had kids in those days that were Prop 48. Okay, I don't know if everybody knows what that is anymore. They couldn't qualify to get in Fresno State by certain standards, and they had to qualify to get in. They had to meet minimum standards, and they had to graduate to get 4 years of eligibility. I had numerous Prop 48 guys graduate. Marcio Botello, who's now a coach at Lemoore, head coach at Lemoore High School, was a Prop 48. Graduated, now he's teaching, coaching, and he was an All-American. I mean, how better? Can't get much better than that. And he came from Portugal, I think. You see he's from Paraguay. I don't know where he's from, but he's a good story right there, Great kid, supports Fresno State, wants us back real bad. He's had some kids at Fresno State since they bought him back. So he's a good example. I've got a guy like John O'Brien, who was earlier in his career. I think it was the early 80s. I get so many years mixed up as coaching so long. John O'Brien was just a guy that just loved wrestling and really feels like he should give back to wrestling. He's learned so much from it. I think he comes from a family of, I think he has 9 brothers or 8 brothers and a sister, and he lived in a real little house. But John has gone on and done very well for himself, and he's very, very generous supporting our program. And, example of him is how he just worked his way from nothing to something. And he, one of the few Bulldogs that gives back. That's been our biggest problem. A lot of our Bulldogs might be on the line right now, but they don't give back. Give back, Bulldogs. You got where you're at because of us, because of Fresno State. And we need everybody out there. If everybody in the country gave $5, we'd be in good shape.
Coach, you talk about, those Bulldogs, but we look at the sport of wrestling, whether you're the All-American or whether you're the guy that's just, maybe next to last in the team run, or somebody that sat there and stuck it out as a workout partner for 4 and 5 years and earned that degree. Wrestling, we say, is a family. It's a brotherhood. It's a sisterhood. It's a fraternity. It's a group of like-minded individuals. We may not always get along, but we all have those same scars, the same battle scars, so to speak. We all have shared in the wins and losses of our teammates. What makes coaching wrestling at a place like Fresno State special for you as a coach and for your athletes that you coached?
Well, I think, the challenge of Fresno State is unlike the Oklahoma States, the Penn States, we try to get kids that had a rough background, had a rough time getting in school, but exceeded what they were supposed to do. We made All-Americans out of them, which is I'm very proud of. I think I had like 35 All-Americans, and that wasn't easy. But the tone in the room, it was a family atmosphere. But don't get me wrong, it was a dog eat dog in our room, and sometimes when we were in our other room, it was the room was about the size of a doghouse. It was so small, but we survived a lot of things. We survived a lot of things in that place. And one thing I never did, and probably Fresno State never even appreciates it, I never asked for any money from Fresno State. I always went out and raised the money. I never asked them for a cent above what they gave me on my budget. And I knew the whole time that we could be, on the chopping block. So I just really, good example, we bring Oklahoma State in, and we pay them $1,500 guarantee money in those days. You know who paid for that? My booster club. Did the school reimburse my booster club? No. I mean, these are little things, but I never complained about that because I was just happy to have them in our gym. The atmosphere. We had Penn State there. We had Lehigh. We've had some big time schools there. I think McCoy wrestled our gym at Penn State. We had some good people there. Kevin Jackson was at LSU. Never had John Smith at our gym except kicking my butt as a coach. But other than that, we've had some good people in there. And it's just a family affair. And I used to call. This probably shouldn't even say this. I had two teams: my wrestling team, and my gender team. Because in those days you had to have a cap. And unbeknownst to a lot of administrators, a lot of my guys that were on caps were still somewhere involved in the wrestling program. I never believed in cutting anybody ever. Never would, never will.
As we talk about the teams that you brought in, it seems that you cared about the community and showing the Buchanans, the Clovises, the Clovis West, the Clovis, everybody up and down the valley, the high school wrestlers, that here is the highest level of teams that we can bring in. You brought the best wrestling to the community. How important was it for you to showcase Fresno State wrestling to the city of Fresno and the Valley community?
Oh, I thought it was really important. There for a while, we were wrestling in Oklahoma and Oklahoma State every other year. We'd go to Oklahoma, and then they'd come to us, and that was huge. And I think we had Cornell out there one year, Penn State, Northwestern. We had the best of the best. And, wrestling coaches. I wish everybody was a wrestling coach because they all help each other. And, they came out to help the program. They knew, the West Coast wasn't real, what you call solid. Even in those days, it was shaky, But it was just, it's wrestling coaches are a different breed. We all help each other. It's just a family affair. And your wrestlers grow up that way, and that's the way they end up as a family. And shoot, I got guys on my team. I hate to even say this, say I wrestled for you in 19, so and I don't even remember who they were, but because a lot of the guys didn't start and they say I wrestled that year, and I wouldn't remember them. But the guys you don't remember are the guys that help you the most. The guys you remember seem like they don't help you as much, but that's my own personal opinion about my superstars.
As a longtime resident there and a longtime person in the sport of wrestling, if you had one statement to say about the value that wrestling brings to the Fresno community, what would it be?
Well, wrestling is the biggest learning tool you could have in life. Get out there on the mat, in front of people. Education wise, it helped me get through school. I wouldn't have got through school if it wasn't for wrestling. I bet you a lot of guys on this call wouldn't have got through school without wrestling, being eligible and getting your degree. It's a tool. I'll give you an example. My nephew, Harold Zinkin, he was 95 pounds as a senior in high school. I didn't think he would get big enough to be a wrestler in college. Well, he went on and was an All-American for me. and he's done very well financially, and he owes it all, he says, to wrestling. He says, everything I learned on the mat, off the mat, right now to this day is because of wrestling. And you talk to anybody, and that's the truth of life. Wrestling is the greatest learning tool there is. I mean, it's life. Wrestling is all about life. How you handle struggles, how you overcome them, how you do with them. And Yaru, those stories, Barcio Botel, I got 100 guys stories like that just achieved way beyond their means because they were part of the family, and whether they're superstars or just workout partners, it was a great. Fresno State had a great atmosphere, I think, while I was there.
Coach Deleto, appreciate your time. We're definitely going to have more stories from you in the coming weeks as we keep moving on with the Keep Fresno State Wrestling campaign.
Thank
Next
you.
up, we'll introduce a world bronze medalist and Olympian. He won 2 junior college national championships, was a 2001 NCAA finalist. It's been that long. Geez, NCAA finalist for Oklahoma State. He's got a couple things. He's got a couple straps from the USC, I think. A Louisiana native, Daniel Cormier, head coach at Gilroy, one of the top programs in the state. Mr. Cormier, thank you for your participation here in Keep Fresno State's wrestling campaign. And before we kick things off, I want to know, what's it like for you the last 2 years to really kind of engross yourself in California high school wrestling?
You know what, Jason, it's been different. I had been away from coaching for a long time since I left Stillwater back in 2009. And so I had been coaching kids, but never really coaching at a level where I was trying to be competitive with people. And for the last 2 years, I've really loved being around the sport more, and also getting to see the type of talent that is what is California. It's like nothing I've seen in the high school level in my life.
Your experience in seeing some of the studs from California came from your days in that room in Stillwater. Of course, several Californians were on that roster and did quite well for Coach Smith and the Cowboys. But when you think about Fresno State wrestling prior to coming to California as a high school coach, and of course your fighting career brought you there, what do you remember most about Coach Dennis Deleto's teams?
You know what's crazy about Coach D is like him and I's story goes all the way back to 2001. Because I remember going into the little gym at Fresno State, we dueled him. When he talked about John would kick his butt on the wrestling mat, I remember we wrestled Fresno State in the little gym, and back-to-back Tyrone Lewis and I got lateral drops, and we won the match, and Coach Deleto was like, what is going on? At that time, Dwayne Zinkin, his nephew, and my manager to this day, was starting to get into managing mixed martial arts fighters. Coach D is almost in a roundabout way responsible for me fighting, because he made the introduction between me and Dwayne, saying, hey, there's this guy came into the little gym. He's athletic. I think the sport will work for him. And I just remember Dwayne taking his uncle's word, and we built our relationship. And today we've won a lot of championships, and we've done a lot of special things based on the relationship what Coach D saw in me in the little gym and as I went on in my wrestling career. But I remember the guys being scrappy. I remember those guys being hard-nosed. I remember the guys just being willing to fight. And I think ultimately, when it comes to a wrestling match, a lot of times it's about fighting. And the Fresno State guys knew how to fight, and they were slick. They could scramble. They could really scramble. And I wasn't the guy that scrambled. So watching Stephen Abbas and Jerry and those guys and flipping through the legs and catching the ankle and really almost changing the game. Before there was Ben Askren and all these other guys that were known for funk, it was the Abbas brothers that developed that style in the room down in Fresno. So it all those things really did stick with me as I've watched Fresno State from when I was an athlete to where I am today.
You're blessed to have a coaching staff that's got a lot of wrestling experience and all around this country. And those of us that look at California wrestling from an outsider, you're an outsider coming into California coaching.
Yeah.
You didn't grow up there, so you don't really know what the kids think about until you actually got there coaching with them. What do your kids think about Division I college wrestling and their opportunities? And how much does a school like Fresno State sit in their radar, be like, Coach, I think I want to go to Fresno State. I want to go to, I want to stay in California to wrestle and represent my state.
Jason, we really came in with an idea that we wanted to have more kids from Gilroy. Yaru talked about his background and where he grew up at. There's been good wrestling in Gilroy for a long time, but we spoke about getting kids into college more, right? More often, more frequently. And for the last 2 years, we've had 16 kids go to college on scholarships, not only boys, but also girls. So taking our relationships that we have outside of just California and building them. But here's one thing. I've had 3 guys, 3 commitments to Fresno State. Ryan Reyes, who was a state champion, committed to Fresno State. Nicholas Villarreal, who was a 2-time state runner-up, committed to Fresno State. And Jaden Gomez committed to Fresno State because they saw the value in the program, looking at the coaching staff, looking at the facilities, looking at their commitment to getting better, not being okay with just being okay, was one of the things that really drew me and allowed for me to talk to my kids and go, you know what, that is a great decision to go and wrestle down in Fresno because I can see what they're building.
Coach Deleto talked about the old Prop 48s, and you were a junior college athlete yourself, coming from Louisiana, and not necessarily going directly to Division I, but a school like Fresno, it's not Stanford. So we know that certain type of students that may not have that rough upbringing can do the Stanford thing, or they can do the Cal Poly thing. Why does Fresno State Wrestling serve a need, not just for wrestling, but for the citizens and taxpayers of California?
Oh, it provides an outlet for guys like myself who didn't have the grades or the ability to go to one of the bigger universities. You know, you can work with a state university like Fresno State and, you know, different state universities around the country. But I know that kids love Fresno because not only does Fresno State provide a great opportunity to compete, they also have a ton of sports. They also have a great being in Fresno for college seems like a lot of fun, right? The football team's better, baseball team's better. There are a number of things that people enjoy about Fresno, and to have wrestling in the Central Valley, where I believe, I mean, honestly, across the country, the Central Valley of California wrestling may be better than any area in the entire nation when it comes to that. Their regional tournament, their sectional tournament, Jason, is the most insane thing I've ever seen in my entire life. They've got Clovis North, Clovis West. They've got Buchanan. They've got Selma. They've got all these great teams wrestling in order to get into the state tournament, taking 9 people to the state tournament from their bracket. I've got 13 dudes in the finals in my conference. You know, I'm over here living life. They're beating each other up. I'm over here just kind of cruising into the state tournament every year. It's a very competitive area, but they need the program to stay, because if they can get these kids from that area, all these talented kids, to stay and wrestle in town, Fresno State has the ability to be one of the top 10 teams in the country. That's how important it is to the state of California to have a school like Fresno keep wrestling around.
Also looking at the development. I mean, we got an All-American from Fresno State the second year the program was reinstated. You've been, I mean, even though you weren't actively coaching during your UFC career, you were still following Division I college wrestling. You'd be brought in to do commentary for the US Open and things like that. You paid attention to what's going on. To have an All-American, you're basically your second year as a program, and not having be a ringer from another school. What does that say about the development and what the school had going there with wrestling?
You know, for a guy like Josh Hokie, who went to Fresno to play football, right? Guy was a fantastic running back. And then when the program got brought back, he's like, I've wrestled a long time. Let me get back in the room and try to follow another sport that I love. Got in there with the coaching staff. They were able to get their hands on him, reintroduce him to the sport that he did his life, and look at what it turned into. I mean, these guys from this area, like I said, they've wrestled at such a high level for so long that if they stay home, they can become just about anything they want to be. And I just think that Fresno State is a place where wrestling can be really good. You know, Jason, I went to a do meet last year and the place was packed. I went to a do meet right before a high school tournament. The place was packed. People want to see wrestling in the Central Valley. They show up in droves, and there's good wrestling every single time you step out on that mat.
When you look at the makeup of the kids you have, probably every single one of them would fit at Fresno. Every single one of them is a wrestler. You know, you've obviously bringing the coaching tutelage and your mentality to them, but why, as even before this, why would you push a kid to Fresno State as a high school coach?
You know, as a coach, I would send them there because I know they're going to get a good education. I know that they have a chance, right? A lot of the kids from here, from Gilroy, you know, they want to stay close. You know, I've got a lot of kids that want to be close to family. And like Coach Deleto spoke to on a number of occasions when he was speaking, they're a family over there. So to go into that family environment, to feel something familiar as they feel at home is very important to these young men. And Fresno provides that. They provide not only a great opportunity to compete at the highest level in the Big 12, they also provide great facilities, but they create a family environment that will allow for these young men to feel like they are still close to things that they've known their entire lives. That's so important. You know, the area I'm from, it's all about family. And these kids need to be in a program where they can feel that when they go off to college.
Daniel Cormier speaking words of wisdom from Gilroy High School, about 2 hours, I believe, as far as Google Maps says, west of Fresno. And now we're going to turn it over to one of the guys that ran you through the ringer a couple times, John Smith, the head coach at Oklahoma State, and also going to bring on Jordan Burroughs. And for the sake of brevity, I'm not going to, we'd be here all day if we were going to bring their credentials, but both have won those Olympics things, both have won those world things, both have, won some NCAA championships as athletes, both among the great ambassadors for the sport of wrestling. And Coach Smith, I want to start with you. Speaking as the head coach of Oklahoma State, why is Fresno State and its wrestling program important to Oklahoma State wrestling?
Well, one is they came back. One, being a wrestling coach for 29 years. I loved the fight that they had for 10 years after they dropped it the first time. You just respect that, and when they brought it back and we had an opportunity in the Big 12 to bring them in, we were all excited. It was an exciting time for everyone. It's just nice being in a conference where your leaders of your conference is asking you, what can we do to help the Big 12 win? And that's kind of the attitude of the administrators there in the Big 12. They have attitude that we want to win, not just in football or basketball. We want to win in wrestling. What do we need to do? And we're even still in a movement in the Big 12 to continue to add programs, continue to create a competitive environment that allows people to get better. So for us, it was an easy choice when Fresno decided to bring back their program that let's bring them into Big 12. If they want to come, let's bring them into the Big 12.
You've heard Coach Deleto and Daniel talk about the experiences in Fresno. Tell me about your memories of Coach Deleto's squads when you would bring them into Fresno and get a pretty hostile crowd breathing down your necks.
Well, yeah, as Daniel said, it was exciting. And on our last trip there under Coach Steiner, that was an exciting experience for our team and for the people that wrestled. There was nothing easy about it. Although the score ended up lopsided, there was several great competitive matches. And just talking a little bit about the Valley, Fresno, and the Central Valley there, it reminds me a lot of where I grew up in Oklahoma, the Mid-Dale area. Me being from Dale City and Midwest City, it was a time that Little League was very strong. Several athletes were coming out of the community, going forward and wrestling Division I, II, and III. As you look above me is Pat Smith from Dale City, and my brother, who became the first 4-time national champion. That was a lot because of the community. It instilled in us that we wanted to win. It instilled in us that we wanted to go on and compete and go to college. As Yaru was saying, being a first-time generation of his family going to college, we have a lot of those. And as all 10 of my family members became a first-time generation, it was important. Wrestling was important. So I think of the community, Fresno and the Central Valley. What a great community of wrestling, and we've had guys that have come from there to Oklahoma State, one being now Anthony Matalvo. They have more wrestlers than they have scholarships at Fresno's. So those kids go somewhere, right? And we've all been blessed because of that community and what they've done in the sport of wrestling in Little League and junior high and the surrounding areas. We've all been blessed by being able to recruit kids from there. And we can't remember, we need to remember that you know, a lot of the strength of our program here at Oklahoma State, you think of how did Oklahoma State was built into the legacy is today? It was Stillwater, Oklahoma. It was Cushing, Oklahoma. It was Perry, Oklahoma. It was Blackwell, Oklahoma, Ponca City, Oklahoma, towns that were within 30 minutes of the surrounding area that really built Oklahoma State in a strong legacy and really helped the difference in student athletes succeeding following their wrestling careers.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we've got with Fresno and the teams around there. Daniel alluded to it about how tough that section is. And then Jordan, when we talk about your standing up, you came through when Fresno State didn't have a program, but there's been wrestlers you've competed against from California. Of course, you've competed against those power programs, those power wrestlers. But you and John have just like you're part of that really tiny percentage of wrestlers who go on to do things that exceed our wildest expectations. The average, the drill partner, even the starter, maybe just the qualifier. You guys have won at the highest level. Again, so the same question I asked Coach Smith initially, why does Fresno State matter to an athlete like Jordan Burroughs? Why does it matter for wrestling to you?
For sure, for sure. I think really because everyone aspires to be Olympic champion, but not realistically, everyone is not going to arrive at that place. But we do have a lot of young men and women that are going to build character and be very integral parts of society. And so I think that from my perspective, watching the resurgence and really the reestablishment of Fresno State wrestling has been really cool for me because I've had guys that have been teammates of mine and mentors of mine that have been heavily involved in the program, from Jason Chamberlain to Joe Colon to Izzy Silva with the chaplain being Jose Camp over the last 3 years. This has been a program that has really done a tremendous job in a very short amount of time. Some of the statistics that I've read up on about Fresno State and what they've been able to accomplish in the last 3 years has been tremendous. And the first that stood out to me most was 74% of the Fresno State wrestling team is comprised of minorities. And so me being an African-American from a traditionally urban area back in South Jersey and then arriving at Nebraska, it was a culture shock to me. But hearing, Daniel Cormier talk about family, talk about environment, and also representation, this is huge. How could you not feel at home surrounded by people who look like you, with most of them being from the Valley, which a lot of these guys were from. So it was just an amazing place for these guys to thrive and establish themselves and go on to be contributors to society. And so I think that in my process of growing in the wrestling community, some of the guys that have garnered the most respect haven't been the best wrestlers. It's the guys that are built on character and integrity, the guys that are coachable, that walk with humility, that are low maintenance guys, show up on time, they do the right things in class and in the wrestling room, they take care of business, and they're good teammates. And I think that's truly what Fresno State has been building and is on the brink of continuing to build if we're able to, do what we are here to do. And so it's been an amazing job that they've done. I commend them for it. And anytime that I see wrestling programs being cut, I understand the impact that that has on the community, but also on the world itself. The average coach will impact more people in a single year than any normal person would in an entire lifetime. So I think about all the people that have been most influential to me in my life have been my coaches. My high school coach, Rick Koss, to Mark Manning, to Bill Zadek and Zeke Jones and Bruce Burnett. All of these individuals are the people that I talk about daily, instructing them on how to operate with integrity. And so it's unfortunate that we're here, but I think that just like everything else that we've experienced in the wrestling community, from potentially being dropped in the Olympics to being here with the Fresno State wrestling program, I think that we have the right people in the right places, and we're going to fight to keep this program.
You said you spoke on something that is important. If we look around the group today, you, Yaru, Daniel, Sam, you're athletes of color. It's important for you to be in a situation where with people that look like you. Fresno State, if they continue to go on with the plan of dropping wrestling, there's another part of the population that loses the benefits, as we've talked about. We know the great things that wrestling does for people, whether you're a 1% high achiever on the mats like you, or you were a backup like me on my high school team. it does things for us in ways that we can't really measure. This is now taking that away from, as you said, 74%. That seems to not be doing a service to the citizens of California, not just the citizens of wrestling. So can you speak on the importance of just having that opportunity to do things with people that look like yourself?
Yeah, it's an opportunity thing. It really truly is an opportunity thing. You have to put people in position to be able to find themselves, and wrestling has been that and done that for me. Just following Yaru and his career and the things that he's done through Beat the Streets, and guys like Mike Novogratz and Andy Barth, and literally we've gone coast to coast with the Beat the Streets organization, and we've empowered minorities from all over the country to see that wrestling is such a tremendous sport and how impactful it is in developing great young men and young women. And so to take away the opportunity for them to compete at the next level, it's a travesty. And so I think that we have to recognize that there are so many individuals that are going to be impacted by this. And that's just the ones that we're thinking about as wrestlers, potential scholarships and All-Americans, NCAA champions that go on and move forward and contribute to society. But I think ultimately, I think about the ripple effect that is going to occur because of all the men and women that won't have the opportunity to compete there, all the lives that they would have touched from the things that they learned collegiately. So when I left home, I'm a completely different person at 17, now at 32. Everything that I've learned and established has been because of my time here at Nebraska and the coaching staff and all of the opportunities that they provided me with. And so this is really a lifetime thing. When you go to a college, you don't go just for 4 or 5 years and then move on. You truly are committed for life. Once, a hustler, once a bulldog, always a bulldog. And so I think that this is something that really is going to have a long lasting effect. And that's something that we need to take into consideration.
Going to bring it back to Coach Smith, because there's one match involving Oklahoma State and Fresno State that always had me intrigued. And it was one between Stephen Abbas and Eric Guerrero. So just give us a brief recount of how that match developed, Coach Smith, because that was the last time Mr. Abbas lost in college, and he bumped up a weight to do it. So I'm just curious on your perspective of what you remember about those two locking up.
Well, I think one thing, Eric was a little surprised. We all were a little surprised that when we didn't see Abbas walk out in the 118-pound match. And I look back to Eric and get ready, and it didn't take long for Eric to recognize that this was going to be a little bit of a different match than what he expected. It was a good match, and in the end, Eric did win. Weight difference or whatever. It was a great competitive match, and I know that at the end of the match, everybody stood up in the gym and gave both athletes a round ovation that just recognized that, hey, we got to see something that we didn't expect to see today, and it was a heck of a match.
Both Californians, I might add.
Absolutely.
Now we'll move on to Coach Sam Lopez. First of all, thanks to Coach Smith and Jordan Burroughs for being great advocates and ambassadors to the sport. Again, no direct, no alumni tie to the school, but they're speaking up because, wrestling needs Fresno State. Oklahoma State needs Fresno State. USA Wrestling needs Fresno State. Nebraska needs Fresno State. So, gentlemen, appreciate your input.
Thank you.
Now we move to Sam Turner. He was a 1994 NCAA Division I qualifier at the aforementioned 118-pound weight class. We don't have that anymore. Had one of the tougher draws in the history of that weight that year. Currently the boys wrestling coach at Selma. And I mentioned boys because there's a girls team there. Girls wrestling in California is a thing. They do very well in Fargo. But Coach Lopez has also been a recent recipient of the East Bay Model Coach Award. They are 25 minutes away. And Selma, one of the program's people, when they say California high school wrestling, they talk about Selma, and one of them, and Sam Lopez, you're a big reason behind that. Welcome to the chat here today. And as we talk about Fresno State and keeping Fresno State wrestling, what first drew you to Fresno State to wrestle?
Well, I was one of those Prop 48 kids. Coach Deleto actually started recruiting me back in like in '87 when I my first time. I started wrestling in 9th grade. I came out from New York City, came to California, didn't know anything about wrestling. And then I started as a 9th grader. I ended up placing the state my junior year. And then Deleto was already calling my coach and trying to recruit me. but I didn't have the high enough SAT scores. So I had to go to JC route. And then I was pretty much done with wrestling. I was going to start working and finding a job. But then Coach Deleto called up and said, "Hey, Sam, you still want to wrestle? You still have a year of eligibility." And I'm like, "Yeah, I would like to wrestle, coach." So he goes, "Give me your social security number." So I sent him my social security number. He goes, and about 20 minutes later, he goes, "Here's your schedule. I'll see you next week." So that's the way it happened. I was 4 hours away from Fresno. I was actually in Placentia, California, right down the street from Cal State Fullerton. And I used to go to the Cal State Fullerton matches and watch those matches, but went out to Fresno, got on the team, started training. And then it was amazing. I mean, just the atmosphere and the way the community embraced wrestling. I've never seen crowds that big. Every year we made a poster. We're talking about 7-year-old kids wanting my autograph after the match. Where I'm signing posters and I'm like, wow, this is the knowledge of wrestling in the Valley, and experiencing that at Fresno State. And then I didn't have anywhere to live. So I actually lived in Selma with the Quintanas, with Gary Quintana and all them. They took me in Selma. I was commuting from Selma to Fresno State, and got to give it all to Coach,
Oh, 25 minutes is a little easier than 4 hours on the commute. But when we look about what you're doing now, what about your career at Fresno State kind of altered your path and enabled you to eventually become not just a high school coach, but a good high school coach?
I mean, I love wrestling. Once you love wrestling, you just want to give back. Fresno, they took me in. I mean, seriously, the Zinkins and everybody, I felt welcome. It was an outstanding environment. Everybody was pulling for you. And same thing with Selma. I wanted to be a wrestling coach. I wanted to teach. I was doing other things. I was doing construction, and it just took me a while to finish my education, but I got it done because I'm a wrestler. Wrestlers, never give up. We always want to achieve, we have set goals. And sometimes, you fall on your face and you've got to get your butt up and put on those shoes again and keep battling. So that's what I did. And I wanted to give back to Selma what they did for me, taking me in. And I took over that program. I do boys and girls. It's really not a boys or a girls team. It's just we're Selma Wrestling, Team Selma. And I want those kids to, go on, and had kids transfer over to Fresno State. We're Hispanics are a real tight family thing. If you ever, seen a quinceañera, there's a ton of people show up, and even at our graduations at Selma, one kid brings 30 people in the family. So, it's a good thing. We had Robert Garcia, Christian Rodriguez want to go to Fresno State, and we also, the whole community of Selma want to watch those guys wrestle. We used to bring, at least take up a whole section at the Save Mart Center just to watch those athletes wrestle.
Yeah, the other quarters were rented out for quinceañeras.
Yeah.
But now, as we talk about, again, this is going to sound repetitive, but let's now look at your career, 30 years in coaching, a decade as a head coach. Let's go back to Fresno State. What about Dennis Deleto and his teaching has taken you from a good high school coach to a great high school coach?
Well, one thing I learned, he was really hard on athletes. He was really hard on me. He want to push you, but deep inside, he has a soft spot. I remember I never missed practice, but I think one day I showed up to practice. I had like 102 fever. I was trying to grind through it, and it was right before the WAC tournament. And he's like, "You know what, Sam? Why don't you go home and rest?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." He noticed I was sick, and I went home and rested. And there was even a time when I was wrestling, and Coach knows it, that I lost the head spot. I lost the varsity spot at Fresno State to a challenge match. And then I went around the corner. I was crying like a baby. So, and then Coach came around. He said, "Don't worry, Sam. Don't give up. Anything can happen." And then somehow I got the opportunity to wrestle at the WAC tournament, and I was the number 3 seed. And not just for me, I wanted to let Coach know that I wasn't going to let him down, and I won the conference. And it's just I wanted to prove to him that he made the right choice, and picking this little guy from Placentia, California.
You've talked about what it's like to be in the Valley there. Now, as a high school coach, as a team that has athletes that are sought after, not just from the schools in California, but John Smith is perusing that Valley, and there's Zeke Jones is perusing that Valley. We've got people wanting to get those kids. And then from you as a coach that is in the Valley, that's sitting there and talking to those kids, what was their feeling, one, when they brought the program back and announced it in 2015, to the feeling recently when they announced that they plan on cutting the program?
I mean, there was excitement. I mean, like I said, the knowledge of wrestling in the Valley is great. I mean, all these programs got youth programs. I mean, it's amazing. You know, all the Clovis schools got youth programs. We got a feeder program. I mean, we were talking about they're starting the kids at 5 years old, and by the time they're 9 years old, some of their ability to their technique is unbelievable. So I mean, they were excited. The kids were excited going to the matches. You know, I mean, like I said, there'll be a dual match at Fresno State. You know, half of the summer community was going in to watch matches. They want the knowledge of wrestling so deep. So you know, it's real painful. You work for something, you build something. I mean, they got great facilities now. I mean, outstanding. And then it feels like, you know, you get punched in the gut again. You know, what do we have to do to keep this program around for individuals like me? And then even an assistant coach that helped me out, Lalo Mose, was on my teammate. He helped me out at Selma. He's teaching. We had Eddie Luna, who's now at Bullard High School. He was at, you know, Clovis East before. He's teaching and coaching. So, I mean, the problem is when you lose this program, you're actually hurting the community too. These individuals are giving back. We plant roots in the Valley, and you know, we're trying to give back. We're helping kids, lower income kids. I mean, just like Coach Deleto does, I do not cut any of my wrestlers. If you want to learn how to wrestle, you're in there. Whether you're a boy or girl, doesn't matter. We train you, and we try to make you find a love for wrestling.
You touched on the teachers and such, and this is one thing this is where our teachers, coaches, and mentors come from. It's from sports like wrestling at schools like Fresno State, schools where their graduates are going to go end up being teachers. They're going to get into the education system. As you said, they're going to put down roots. One thing we see Pennsylvania is super good at great. Let's not undersell it. They're pretty great at the high school wrestling level because their alumni, their graduates come back and they were at these schools that had teaching programs, and they go back and they coach in their communities, and it creates a community around those schools, those teams. And from what I've seen, it's not just the Valley isn't just about football. So when the Bulldog football team's doing well, of course the Valley celebrates. But when the Valley, when Fresno State Wrestling had the chance now to do well, to bring in those big crowds, the Valley celebrates. So how important is that from you as a resident of the Valley and a wrestler to know that it's your teammates and the kids? Like how many Fresno State teammates do you see coaching at the sectionals or the state tournament? I mean, you got to turn one way. Oh, wrestle with that guy. Oh, wrestle with that guy. That's the thing in California. That's the thing and why Fresno State's important.
And one of the good feelings is, you know, at one time when I go watch the matches, at one time, some of those guys were our opponents. I mean, I'm watching the kids from Buchanan. I watch kids from, you know, from down south, from, you know, different little towns. And then once they become Fresno State athletes and put on that Bulldog singlet, their family, we're rooting for them. We're no longer rooting against them. I mean, that was probably the most exciting thing and prestigious thing of this was putting on a damn Fresno State Bulldog singlet. I mean, it was outstanding. But and then I mean, the type of show they're putting on now with the raised stage and all this stuff, it was exciting to go watch a dual match at Fresno State.
Yeah,
it's like wrestling in a small little gym, you know, where it was like Fight Club. You go out of bounds, they throw you back to the circle. Well, get back in there and get them. So it's a lot better environment for wrestling, and the way the scene is, it's outstanding.
Sam Lopez, appreciate your input and best of luck when we get back on the mats in California.
Hope soon.
Now, as we wrap up this particular roundtable, we're going to bring it back to Brendan Buckley, who had his wrestling program when he was wrestling at Clemson cut from under him. He found a new home at Fresno State. He's continued to give back to the sport of wrestling, where he's currently the executive director of Beat the Streets in New York City, was also an All-American at 142 pounds in 1997 for Coach Dennis Deleto. And Brendan's going to take us home and tell us how you can help keep Fresno State wrestling. Coach Buckley.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, first, just want to thank everybody on the call. We have some of the biggest names in wrestling here. It really means a lot to, as a few people have talked about, the strength of our community and how, even though we're fierce competitors, we all come together with a common cause, and we're all cut from the same stone. So that really means a lot. And I think this is, you know, in this environment we've been experiencing since March, our entire world has been turned upside down. And it's really scary to think about the future of our sport if we don't band together as a wrestling community and we don't fight for the future of our sport. And the Central Valley is so important to, it's a part of the cultural identity. The sport of wrestling is part of the cultural identity of the Central Valley. It's more than accolades. It's more than getting a scholarship. It's certainly about getting a college education, but it's really about for young boys and now young girls to cling to something that can really propel them to achieve things that they may not otherwise do without the sport of wrestling. And when you have a community right in your backyard that has been feeding itself for generations, and the university, you know, they have an obligation to support those student athletes, to support the community, to support the legacies. And so we are calling for everybody to support our efforts, what we're doing. We've got a big hairy goal, and that's to keep the program. And we want that future legacy to have opportunities just like we did. I grew up on the East Coast. I knew very little about Fresno State at that time. And my life I've just received so many blessings as a result of going to the NCAA tournament as a sophomore that year. When I was at Clemson, they dropped, and I watched Jerry Abbas, and I saw the team performing and doing incredibly well. And I was like, wow, they got a great wrestling program out there. I'd like to learn more. And so having an opportunity, meeting Coach Deleto, giving me that opportunity, meeting one of my best friends, Yaru Washington, on the call here. And, you know, people like Sam Lopez and all the teammates that I had, we really need your support. Whether you were a starter, whether you wrestled just for a year, if your son is a high school wrestler, or your neighbor wrestled at Fresno State, we just really need people to come together and to help the effort. And what we're trying to do right now is to demonstrate to Fresno State's athletic administration, put our best foot forward and let them know that there's a commitment here to collaborate and to achieve a goal in keeping the program. We want them to meet us halfway, but we need to demonstrate our best effort. So we've already started on our wrestling website, keepfresnostatewrestling.com. There's a site for pledges where we're trying to raise a sum of money to demonstrate that commitment, but we also are trying to have the funding that we need to support these efforts, to work with strategists who can help us achieve this goal, to do things like this, and to get out in the media and to share the narrative, you know, the narrative that, 70% on the Fresno State wrestling team are people of color, that a significant 60+%, I believe, are first generation college students. The people in the Valley, want to go to Fresno State. They want to be a Bulldog. Coach Steiner has had an incredible success in recruiting people from his own Valley. For the last 10 years, it's been Buchanan High School or Clovis High School that has won the state title, I believe. That's incredible. Like, why would we simply can't let that legacy pass us by. And so I know I'm committed to it. I experienced that painful experience of having the wrestling program dropped. Things worked out for me, and I feel so blessed and fortunate. It didn't work out that way for a lot of people, a lot of my teammates from Clemson, and it's not working out that way for a lot of the people on the Fresno State team right now. They want to stay, or they can't afford to go out of state, or maybe they haven't had an opportunity to prove themselves yet, like some of the other student athletes who have opportunities to transfer. And so we just got to give all that we can. It's a tough environment right now. There's lots of distractions, but I think if we really tap into the identity of who we are as former wrestlers and the impact that it's had on us, I know that motivates me, and I hope that will motivate everybody else. So go to the website, keepfresnostatewrestling.com, check out our social media pages, make a pledge, make a donation, spread the word. If you know people who are of key influence that would help us get the administration to come to the table, to see things through our eyes and to do the right thing, we would really appreciate it. And we're all ears. We're here. Our contact information is on the website as well.
And from a wrestling perspective, you are allowed to give to a school that's not your alma mater. some of us out there are looking for places to give. So there's an opportunity again at KeepFresnoStateWrestling.com. So on behalf of Keep Fresno State Wrestling, Yaru Washington, Dennis Deleto, Daniel Cormier, John Smith, Jordan Burroughs, Sam Lopez, and Brendan Buckley, my name is Jason Bryant. Again, that website, KeepFresnoStateWrestling.com.
Go Bulldogs.
Go Bulldogs.